This video forms a sort of appendix to my longish video on binding a mini book that really is intended to accompany the package I'm selling on Binding Your Own Mini Books that provide PDF files for everything you need to bind a mini book. I'll leave a link below. But in that video, I didn't want to overwhelm people with sort of too much at once. But there are a few optional extras that you may want to do, perhaps once you've already done one trial, or whatever, it's up to you. And that I mentioned that I'll add an extra video to show that. And the first thing is adding a ribbon marker and or headbands. Now depending on the type of book, particularly for religious books or journals possibly as well, you might want to have a ribbon marker, or you can have more than one in fact. So I'll show you briefly how to do that. It's not difficult. And then the second thing is that books often have decorative headbands or head and tail bands at the top and the bottom. Those are, well, with contemporary case binding, those are purely decorative. Historically they served a purpose, but now they're purely decorative. Traditionally they're stitched, but I'm not going to show that. It's a much more difficult process, and I may eventually do a separate video on that. And then in the modern era, with more mass-produced case-bound books, one could actually buy artificial headbands that would be glued onto the text block. But what I'm going to show now is simply a simple way of making them, either from paper or from fabric, over a core of string. So what I'll do now is just show you how I do that. This is just a piece of decorative paper. I cut it off. It's the same as the end page paper. So if you have the package, you could print another sheet of the end page, or you could find something yourself. And what I'll do then is I'll have my piece of paper, and I'll have a piece of string that is a bit longer than the width of the paper. At this point the measurements aren't crucial, although I would suggest having it at least two centimeters wide. And the string core, for a mini book I'd suggest doing it a fairly thinnish string. For a bigger book you might want it thicker. So all I do now is I glue in the back of my paper. I'm just using PVA. Oops, put something on it. Okay, and then I'm just going to, roughly in the middle, put my string down. Always have a damp cloth and a dry cloth, and I'll pull the paper across it and fold it down there so that your string sort of protrudes out. And then I'll just go along carefully with my bone folder. Be aware that paper is fragile, so yeah, just be careful with that. And that's basically it. And I'll leave that to dry for a bit. And I'm going to show another option with fabric. Now with fabric it's a little trickier because applying glue to the fabric, you don't really want it to go right through it. So it's best to work with really thick glue, and then you don't want too much on your brush. So I'm just sort of doing a, yeah, trying to get some glue all over it, but not too much. We'll see how that is. And then I'll do the same thing. You could also do this with book cloth if you have book cloth or have made your own book cloth, which is backed. The only thing is that then it becomes thicker and will be a bit more difficult. Now, the thing is with this, I should have been more careful, because the pattern you actually need, I didn't think of that when I did it, but with a pattern piece like this, it would have been I can still use this side, but it would have been best to keep that all the same, I suppose. But anyway, you get the point. If you do use a patterned piece, just be careful that, because what you're going to see is basically what's along the string. Anything underneath you won't see, so it doesn't matter what it looks like. But I can still use that bit. Okay, so that's our 2 pieces of book cloth, and we leave that to dry. Now for a ribbon marker, I've got a piece of thinnish ribbon here. For a miniature book, I would suggest a thinner ribbon, although that's obviously up to you. And make sure you have the book the right way up. And what we're going to do is we are going to glue it on the top of the spine there in the middle. If you had more than one, depending on the size of the book, you could put them next to each other. And the length is also up to you. What I was taught was that it should come down like that and then a bit more, which would, yeah, I tend to do it longer than I was taught, but that's what I was taught, and that's up to you. So I'll cut it off first. And then I basically just am going to apply glue at the top here. Always brush out so you don't get it on the edge of the book. And then place it in the middle and just push it down. Now if you were just applying a ribbon marker and not planning to do end headbands, you needn't have glued it all in. But what I'm going to do now is do the headbands on top of the ribbon. Now there are different ways of doing this, but I would suggest that the easiest would be to take a strip of paper. I should probably have done that before I glued it. And measure from the one edge of the spine to the other, so that you get the width of the spine, or maybe just slightly under that. Now I'm going to take my headband that I made, and you can do this either with the scissors or a knife. This is probably easier with the scissors. Just trim the edge so that it's straight. And then I think the easiest is to measure it on here. And cut off the width of the headband. And I'll just check it before I glue it on. and we're going to place it like that. So what I'll do is then, I've already put glue on there. I'm just going to put a bit more so that it's over the ribbon. And then we basically just place the headband over the ribbon and press it down firmly. Now, yeah, just press it firmly and leave it to dry. Yeah, so there we go. And then you do the same on the bottom one. I'm just going to do the cloth on the bottom so you can see that as well. So that's a ribbon marker and headbands. And if you want to do that, you do it after you've rounded the book and before you make the cover, or at least before you case it in. The other optional thing I thought I'd show you is a way of accentuating the grooves at the spine. Now this isn't essential, and you could just wipe them down well with a dry cloth. But this is something I tend to do it more for my bigger books. And what I've done for them is actually glued some skewers to boards, and then when I press them, I press the groove in, which accentuates it quite nicely. With the miniatures, it's a little more tricky, but what I have here are some boards that I've simply glued toothpicks to, and that can work quite nicely. So what you do is I'd first press the book and check whether glues come out, and then before I put it back in the press, what I do is I'll put it between my boards, but I'll put it on these. As I said, it's a bit fiddly because it's much smaller, but you basically position it so that the toothpick will press into the groove. So the toothpick then goes in that little 5mm gap between the cover board and the spine board. Now this only really works if you have a reasonably, excuse this, it's an old something. I find it doesn't work so well if the board you've used for the cover is less than about 1 millimeter. So you'll just have to see. But I'll position that and then just check that it's, yeah, can be a little bit fiddly. Check that it's positioned in the right place so that they're even on both sides, and then we're going to press it again. And you don't have to apply too much pressure, but that helps to push that little groove in. If you do this, I'd leave it for a few minutes and then check it, because you may find that glue has come out at that point, and then you need to wipe it away, and then you can put it back. You could just leave it for an hour or so and then take them out, depending how much of a groove you want. So I'm just going to check this. It looks fine. Make sure that my wax paper is still there. You don't have to use the cardboard boards. You could just stick toothpicks in there, but I find that that helps. It makes it much easier. Otherwise, they slip all over the place. There are also other methods of tying a string or cord around it, but this is easy. So I'll just leave that for an hour or so. Or I could leave it the whole time until it dries, and that'll give us a nice more accentuated groove.